you will tell your nation that they have a friend in this house. This is what you will tell them.
The Unheeded Message of the Holocaust, a radio documentary feature produced, written and narrated by Andrew Phillips. Studio engineer and sound mix, Stephen Erickson. Location sound recording, Arlene Krebs. Special thanks to Professor Jan-Karski. In Jerusalem, a tree bearing his name has been planted in the Alley of the Righteous Gentiles among nations. He now lives in Washington, D.C., where he's a university professor.
I never spoke about my war experiences. I didn't want to go back for 30 years. I never spoke publicly. I ran away from this. I wanted to be normal. My wife, who lost all her family in Poland, in the ghettos, in the gas chambers, until today she's the same way. I tell my students, they believe me, but they listen. And then we have discussion with individual students. They take it as a sort of ancient myth. Not real. Like stories from Iliad, Odyssey, Homer. It is impossible for people who did not see it actually to understand it, to have a feeling. They may be informed. They cannot conceive it.
I acknowledge Claude Landsman's masterful documentary Shoah, where I first learned of Jan-Karski's story. Jan-Karski's book is called Story of a Secret State, published in 1944 by Houghton Mifflin. I'm Andrew Phillips. If you'd like a cassette copy of this program, call now 1-800-USA-1718. That's 1-800-USA-1718. You've just heard Jan-Karski's story of the unheeded message of the Holocaust. My name's Andrew Phillips, and I produced this program for the Australian Broadcasting Corporation in 1986. And with the tremendous interest in Steven Spielberg's film Schindler's List, Virtual Radio Network has redistributed Jan-Karski's story through public radio. The Australian writer Thomas Keneally wrote the book Schindler's List. I interviewed Thomas Keneally in New York, and I asked him about the genesis of the book Schindler's List, and also how it could be that so little was done to stop the Holocaust. Here's Thomas Keneally.
Leopold Pfefferberg was a luggage merchant in Beverly Hills, from whom I bought a briefcase in late 1980. He was a survivor. He had been rescued by Schindler, so had his wife. It took a considerable time for the charges on my credit card to be cleared, and in that time Poldek began to talk about Schindler, and then ultimately introduced me to 2 filing cabinets full of Schindler material which he had at the back of his repair room. The destruction process in Poland began round about the early summer of 42. Some of the people on whom the process was tested were Russian prisoners of war. Before that, the carbon monoxide method had been used on mental patients in Germany itself, putting people inside a truck whose exhaust fumes were funneled into the locked back of the truck itself. So there was a precedent for the use of carbon monoxide. And in the summer of 1942, there was the rounding up of 7,000 people from the Krakow ghetto And these people were sent to Belzets, where they were gassed in gas chambers, not in trucks, with carbon monoxide. And this was one of the earliest bits of information about the destruction process that got back to Krakow. One prisoner who was a pharmacist, I think, sheltered for 3 days in a latrine pit, crawled out, returned to Krakow, and reported to the ghetto mention, the people of the ghetto. Schindler himself knew about it, both perhaps through this man who escaped and also from his contacts in the SS. And I think he was profoundly shocked. We take it for granted in a perverse, habitual way now that this thing happened. Most of us do, unless we're neo-Nazis or revisionists, accept that it happened. And we are, given that humans can get used to any concept, we're pretty much used to the idea that this happened. But approaching it from the direction of 1941 or 1942, it was astounding news. It beggared belief. And I know that it beggared belief because I know that Oscar, in the winter of 42-43, having received information not only about Belzets, where the 7,000 from Krakow went, but about Sobibor, Treblinka, and Auschwitz, and what was being developed, prepared, and consummated there, he took off for Budapest to report to members of the Jewish Rescue Organization. Now, a dentist called Sedlacek approached Oscar as a likely German, and of course Oscar was a member of Abwehr, during 1942, and began to feed him money from the Jewish Rescue Organization for the purchase of the freedom of various individuals. And Oscar was obviously very cooperative in spending that money for the rescue of people. Indeed, there's no indication that for an operator he kept a margin either. Sedlacek spoke fondly of him, but so also does Samuel Springman, the great Jewish rescuer. Sedlacek asked Oscar would he go to Budapest, at that stage unoccupied by the Nazis, and report to Springman about the destruction process which had begun already in Poland. So in the winter of 42-43, Oscar went in a freight truck full of newspapers to Budapest and reported to Samuel Springman in a hotel. Samuel Springman and an associate of Springman's about what was happening in Poland. Now, again, he ran up against the problem of disbelief, because Springman told me quite clearly that he was astounded by the news and found it hard to believe. And similarly, the people in the ghetto found it hard to believe, in that it was an absurd length to take race hate. And I think the very absurdity affected disbelief in the West. Mind you, I'm not competent to say to what extent there was racism in the lack of response in the West, and to what extent there was incredulity and ignorance. I don't know what the balance was. I know that there's a very strong debate on this question, and a debate on the question of why the lines into Auschwitz were never bombed. But in any case, though I can't buy into that, I am aware of the fact, from the people that I interviewed, the fact that they found it hard to believe, both Jews and Gentiles. Now, on top of reporting to Samuel Springman, whom I was able to interview for the book, it seems now as if Oscar went to Istanbul as well. There is an extant picture of Oscar in shirt sleeves in an open vehicle with von Papen, the former chancellor, who was not, to use that great American political term, in the loop as regards the Holocaust. So it seems as if Oscar may have also reported what was happening to von Papen. So there were these early whistleblowers, God bless them, and generally the response was one of incredulity, not because they weren't reliable witnesses necessarily, but because people thought, this can't be true, this is so absurd. And we know again that a lot of Jewish survivors can remember having heard this news for the first time and having thought, this can't be true. Now, whether on top of that, in the West, in Britain and in the United States, there was any sense that if this is happening, this will solve the problem, sooner the Germans do it than us, I just don't know that. I mean, nothing would surprise me. On the other hand, I have met some historians, including Jewish historians, who say that there wasn't necessarily a lot of knowledge. However, the case of Karski might indicate that there was more knowledge than a lot of historians admit to in the West about what was happening in Poland. That's, to me, that's an open question. I would like to believe that the West would be appalled, but who can say, given that anti-Semitism is almost ingrained in Christendom, who can say what went on at the highest levels? I can remember that as the child of a man who was fighting Nazism in the Middle East, an Australian child, the news of the camps came as a thunderbolt to us. It came as a thunderbolt to ordinary people in the West. The degree of knowledge, however, at the top is a question upon which the Karski case sheds some interesting light.